The streets and neighborhoods in the former Rancho La Puente, more exact, Rowland Heights. I grew up there in the 1960s, and in the hills south of my house was a Nike base. It wasn't spooky or mysterious. It wasn't even a secret. In fact, one of my sister's friends dated a soldier at the base. I went hiking in those hills, but stayed away from the base. It was a very different time in this country. And for those of you who remember, it was a time of national paranoia and fear, the Cold War. And for those of you who don't remember, in our little valley, this country's military apparatus was looking to protect it and the West Coast from both foreign and domestic threats, mostly foreign. The anxiety of a large Russian bomber strike was palpable. From the top of the Puente Hills, I can see both the city of Brea and the community of Rowland Heights. This ideal strategic defensive site was the home to a surface air missile base for some 13 years. I'm Marty Shields, and on this episode of Forgotten Tales, we'll take a look back at an era when atomic warhead-capped missiles were in our neighborhoods. And we were thankful. Duck and cover, but keep one eye open as we take a look back at this area's Nike missile bases, here on Forgotten Tales. In other times of aggression throughout the previous wars, the former rancho and its valley neighbors were home to military schools, encampments, installations, and airfields. During World War I, the city of Arcadia, more accurately Ross Airfield, was the site for a balloon training school. The school sat on land that had once been Lucky Baldwin's horse stables, and now provided 2 large hangars, a training school, and a bachelor army barracks, all courtesy of Anita Baldwin, daughter of the once rancho owner. During World War II, Missouri pack mules and their owners were brought to a school in La Puente. The goal was to train the soldiers at the mule school on the care and handling of these valuable army assets. Known for their ability to carry large amounts of pack weight, these mules' stamina on long drives was legendary. The animals were housed in a warehouse and cattle yard in the corner of Valley and Main Street throughout World War II, on land also owned by Anita Baldwin. Elsewhere in North Whittier Heights, a small company of soldiers set up camp around a satellite dish for 3 years, from 1944 to 1947. Their barracks were in an open field near Valencia and Walnut Avenues. After a while, they became part of the day-to-day life in the Heights, except for the concerns of mothers of teenage daughters.
The mothers, like mine and my friends' mothers, were a little cautious about letting us walk up there at night. Although nothing ever occurred, it was just that there were a bunch of young men that were barracked up there, and probably it would be better if we'd be home before dark. In fact, they had quite a few young men that were there, and they married some local girls. I mean, they were there long enough to create a romance and marriage.
But within 10 years, no place was safe in the valley against the Red Army of Communist Russia. Throughout the valley, school children learned how to duck and cover at a moment's notice. Fear gripped America.
Duck and cover.
What made the valley a prime area for a bomber attack was the importance of Southern California's business industries: aerospace, communications, transportation, and still existing military installations from the war. Ever since the Cold War began, the armed forces of America pushed to fortify this country any way it could. In 1945, Congress initiated a program to build surface-to-air missile bases in key locations from the east to west coasts. Beginning in the early 1950s, Nike missile bases were being built in the LA Basin, that were intended to keep California protected from attack. By 1958, 200 bases were built across the country. That's a lot. Locally, 16 sites were constructed in out-of-the-way areas, miles away from homes and roads, into what was called the Ring of Supersonic Steel. Newhall to the north, Malibu to the west, San Pedro to the south, Stanton to the east. Of the 16 Nike missile bases in the basin, 2 were in the former Rancho's area. The first base built was designated LA Base Number 14, built in South El Monte in 1953. The second missile base in the valley was established in 1958 at the top of the Pointy Hills, north of the city of Brea, LA Base Number 29. Each base consisted of 2 separate locations, the radar and control communications site and the launch battery site, 3 underground missile silos, administration building, a radar and tracking building, mess hall, barracks, and a small motor pool. Within the site, the 2 locations were a quarter mile apart. In case of a bomber strike taking out a launch pad, the radar control site was still able to launch remaining missiles and have contact with other bases. As you can imagine, some of the assignments could be boring, tedious. But for a special few soldiers stationed at the Los Angeles and Hollywood bases, they had a more interesting and exciting tour of duty. Occasionally, Hollywood entertainers were allowed on base and even into the silos. An open door policy allowed beauty contests to be held at the Battery. And they even crowned a woman Miss Atomic Bomb. Not all excitement came from bombshells and bikinis. A particular bombshell attracted a lot of attention and fear in 1960, when on June 7th, a fuel tank ruptured on a Nike missile at Fort Dix Air Force Base in New Jersey. The missile melted down, exposing its deadly plutonium core. Soldiers on duty unknowingly used a fire hose to put out the fire, but by doing so spread the plutonium everywhere, eventually contaminating the groundwater in and around the accident site. Until this day, the area is cemented in and radiates plutonium contaminant. In 1961, the El Monte base was decommissioned. Had the Cold War warmed up? No. The warhead on the top of the Nike missile had been upgraded from an Ajax to the longer range and more powerful Hercules warhead. With the change, fewer sites were needed for protection. Accidents like the one in New Jersey, surprisingly but logically, weren't the most concerning for soldiers. It was fire. Well, forest fires that had the bases around the country and in California on guard. The sites in and around Los Angeles had been purposely built far away from urban sprawl, but that also meant far away from potential help for fires that perpetually flared up in the Angeles National Forest.
Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
A 1959 fire near the Mount Gleason base near Soledad Canyon came uncomfortably close to base number 4. But the fire at base number 94 Los Pinitos near Silmar in 1966 was deadly. First noticed by a soldier in the early morning of November 1st near the radar control area, it had already scorched trees and set fire to telephone poles, cutting communication to the base. For 7 days, the base was engaged in a 24-hour around-the-clock vigil to protect the Nike control radar pedestals from the flames. The inferno consumed 2,000 acres of the forest and killed 12. With housing tracts expanding closer to the sites, concerns began to grow in this country about atomic energy and power, possibly cutting back, slowing down, beginning to limit strategic arm buildups, and hopefully preventing an unintentional horrific disaster by our own military here in America. The first strategic arms limitation talks with the Soviet Union began in 1969. Both countries began to map out a treaty that would lead to the first arms agreement package.
As you know, the Soviet-American talks on limiting nuclear arms have been deadlocked for over a year. As a result of negotiations involving the highest level of both governments, I am announcing today a significant development in breaking the deadlock.
June 1971. The last Nike missile base in the former Rancho that had stood some 13 years was no more. LA base number 29 was decommissioned by the Army. 2 years later, a City of Fullerton Congressman Charles Chuck Wiggins helped acquire the 32-acre Pointy Hill site above Brea. A large city wilderness-style park was planned at the site, along with a themed restaurant, accessible by tram from the Brea side of the hills. In 1978, Brea had the Navy Seabees demolish most of the remaining structures at LA base number 29, along with filling in 3 silos. The buildings that once sat on the site were given up to the elements and forgotten. Currently, the site still remains undeveloped. In El Monte, acres of the old site were used up until recently as a large landfill. This guard shack is one of the last above-ground structures here at LA base number 29 in the Pointy Hills. Like the site in El Monte, it's supposed to become a large park, and when done, you'll be able to see both the San Gabriel Valley and downtown Los Angeles. But with any plan, the potential park, like the El Monte site, may never be built or honored. Only time will tell if this site becomes what it needs to be, should be, an area where our concerned military once made safe and protected this country's way of life, and hopefully become a park that will protect and make safe the hopes and dreams of a better life for generations to come. Well, it's time to mosey on down the road, but we want to make sure we invite you to join us here on another episode of Forgotten Tales. Peace. Adios. Come on.
Tours of the La Puente Heritage Museum are available. Please visit the La Puente Valley Historical Society's website for tour information. Getting to the bottom of a story or myth can be an adventure in itself. If you have a mystery you would like to solve, I suggest you find out for yourself. Discover the information you're looking for at your local library today.